Drawing, and especially drawing animals, is not easy. It can be stressful, it can take a really long time, and quite frankly, I prefer painting over drawing. But I have found 10 ways to not only make the process easier, more efficient, and fun, but also while improving your drawing skills. All right, guys, let's get started. Growing up, I went to lots of summer camps, and this particular one that I really loved was deep in the forest, the middle of nowhere. And I remember I wanted to bring my sketchbook and pencils so that I could draw any of the wildlife or plants that I encountered. And this one day, it was during quiet time, a girl in my cabin was drawing. And of course, I had to ask her what she was drawing and if I could see it. And I was in complete, utter shock when she showed me, because it was the most realistic drawing of a frog I had ever seen. So not only were we both the young age of 8 at the time, but this was also something she was drawing from memory. Now, I remember that feeling like it was yesterday. In that moment, I felt envy, I felt shame, I felt insecurity. And sadly, the rest of that trip, that week-long camp trip, I didn't pick up my sketchbook that whole time. I thought, what's the point? I've had a decent amount of drawing practice and I'm still not at that level. There's no point in drawing if I can't draw realistic. Only true artists, only real artists draw from memory. How this experience affected me later in life was actually pretty significant. Anytime I sat down to draw, I always felt anxious and so easily frustrated. And then 2, I always felt like my drawings were below average and that the only way that they could ever look realistic is if I just traced them. Now, I can bet you, if you've ever told yourself that you're a bad drawer or that you'll never become a good one, you've likely had a similar experience as me, where you saw this magnificent, realistic drawing and told yourself you'd never be able to draw like that and believed it. Or someone literally spoke it over you and declared over you that you were a bad drawer. Now, I can't tell you that those critical, nasty voices will go away, because they really don't. But there's definitely ways to counteract those lies and ways to make the drawing process more fun, easier, and more efficient. And that's what we'll go over right now. Also, by the way, if you wait till the end of this video, I'm doing a super special giveaway. The first 4 tips of these 10 tips that I'm about to share, they're kind of like my first 4 steps in my drawing process. Tip number 1, also step 1, I recommend printing off 2 reference photos. One that you use with a marker or colored pencil to draw out directly on the reference photo all the shapes that you see, the circles, all the ovals, all the squares that you can pull out of that drawing directly on the reference photo. And then that second reference photo is what we refer to, because it's the first one's all marked up, is what we look at for the details, like all the strands of fur, all the scales, all the tiny little highlights in the eye that we'll be drawing at the end of our sketch. All right, so tip 2, also step 2, is I would only draw those shapes that I drew on the first reference photo. I'm a firm believer in muscle memory, so it's almost like I'm repeating the same movements that I did on that reference photo on my paper or canvas. Step 3, also tip 3, so once those shapes are down, then you would focus on lines and angles. Lines to connect the shapes, and also angles if you're not quite sure about, say, the detail of a curve or how thin or wide to make something. You could just make your simple angles so that when we go in with our details at the end with our sketch lines and we find those, we know approximately where that line's going to be. Tip number 4, after I get the shapes down, after I apply the lines and the angles, then I do some shading. Sometimes we think that our lines aren't in the right spots, but then when we do some shading, we realize that they actually are. And then on the flip side, by adding a little bit of shading, we can see then what lines we need to adjust. Tip number 5, I know a lot of you artists have probably already heard this, but sometimes we need that little reminder. Don't press hard, especially at the beginning. If you have a tendency to press hard, like I do, 4H pencils are what I use now. It's like almost the only pencil I buy. And then I won't tell you the last tip, but that's what I start with. The 4H pencil is so light and soft, you really have to press hard to see it. Tip number 6, when I recommend to use your eraser to start erasing is after you've applied the shapes, the lines, the angles, and the shading. That's when we're gonna pull out that second reference photo and now focus on details. So I encourage you to not erase anything until that point. Why this made the process so much more efficient for me is because it carried out that rough, ugly stage until the end. That way at the beginning, I wouldn't be obsessing over those imperfections. Tip number 7, I will always recommend to creatives that they use a rubber eraser. This was like a game changer for me, guys. Not only does it not smudge or just like very little, but you can mold it into tiny little shapes so that you can erase tiny little areas. All these materials that I'm mentioning will be in the description box linked below. Tip number 8, just focus on creating a rough sketch. This doesn't have to be a perfect sketch. I've had loads of rough, decently accurate sketches that turned out to be really good paintings that I love. I find that when I start adding the paint, I can do even further comparing and contrasting to get proportions right. Tip number 9. So something I've done to sort of like check my drawing is after I think I've completed a drawing and that it looks the way I want it to, I would then trace the drawing and as close to that same size as possible and compare my drawing to the tracing. This builds your confidence. It shows you that your lines are actually not that far off, and this will also show you areas that you need to improve. All right, guys, my last tip, tip number 10, is to improve your drawing skills by practicing lean, thin animals, muscular animals like horses, like greyhounds, pit bulls, cheetahs. If you can paint, or I should say, if you can draw these animals, you can draw any animal. They are more challenging, but if you use these tips that I've just gone over and the steps that I've gone over, I think this will make it a lot more fun, efficient, and easier for you. And better yet, I have 5 more tips in a drawing guide PDF linked down below, a free guide with the 10 steps we've just gone over, and 5 bonus tips to help you draw faster, more easily, and better. And not only that, I'm doing a Valentine's Day giveaway where I'm choosing one winner who leaves a comment down below within the next 24 hours who will receive 2 free months in my online animal art masterclass. Now that's 2 months of learning how to draw and paint pets and wildlife while reducing stress. Creating animal art played an enormous role in my own recovery with addiction, anxiety, and depression, and it's still something I use to this day to help me manage stress. So the heart behind this class is to help encourage, inspire, and bring hope to artists battling similar mental struggles. Now keep a lookout because if you're chosen, I'll respond to your comment and then you can even get started that same day. And if this video was helpful, be sure to like and subscribe. Have a blessed Valentine's Day. Bye.